Hello, welcome, beautiful souls, to Sacred Her Story podcast, where we remember, reclaim, and rise. I'm your host, Jennifer Natasia, and today I am joined by Sacred Soul in Purpose and Power, Krista Holland, founder of the Frame Drumming Academy. She is a multifaceted teacher, frame drummer, and independent researcher on the frame drums, ancient, global, and polycultural history. I'm so excited to have her on here because these drums, she just did a little bit of playing, and I'm like, whew. So may you feel everything here today. Krista, thank you for being here. So excited to have you.
Thank you, Sia, Jennifer. Yeah, I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Yes, same here. From our conversation, you just shared so much um history and should I say her story? So much her story with, this sacred frame drumming. And so let's just get started. Like, what got you into it? Can you just share with us all the beauty and medicine with these drums? And I know we got a special gift for those who listen today at the end or towards the end. So,
Sure. Well, I think to begin with, the frame drum,
mhm.
people can probably see I have a music school, mostly online, but also in person. And I specialize in this drum called the frame drum, which is similar in a sense to what many associate with the shamanic drum, but it also is very different. It is under this big umbrella. Frame drumming are our most ancient instruments, and they're found all over the world. They're found on every continent. And so I'll tell you a little bit as we go about how I originally got into drumming, but I really just wanted to acknowledge this drum in particular. So it's got the wood shell, and then oftentimes it would have skin over it. And in this version, there's no crossbar on the back, and we play with our bare hands and fingers as opposed to a beater or a stick or a mallet. And modern anthropologists and indigenous people, there's sort of this great debate about which is older, which is the older drum, whether that be just the frame drum with the open shell played with the fingers or the shamanic drum with the beater. And anyway, they both go very, very far back in ancient history and herstory, we could say, as you mentioned. And there's a global remembrance happening because this drum was really much, particularly in the hands of Dominion in the ancient world and all over the world in many different cultures, many different religions and belief systems played the frame drum in their sacred ceremonies.
Mm, that's incredible, and can you share with us like where those cultures you said your polycultural history and I mean ancient, I mean I can understand the part where did you play with the hands first or the beater, right? But I'm curious, like with the polycultural, we touched on it and you shared a few places, and I'm just curious, how deep does this go?
Yes, it goes very deep, it goes very wide, and the history and the herstory is still being uncovered actually. So
Mm,
it's another point where people have been studying where did the frame drum arise? And one of the reasons we don't know exactly is because the drums being made of wood and skin, they degrade in the archaeological records. So they basically go back into the soil.
mm,
But what we do have are thousands and thousands of images from all over the world in different artistic mediums that depict women in many different traditions, many different cultures, as I mentioned, all different skin colors playing these drums. So the
mhm.
artistic record is in reliefs, hieroglyphs, vase paintings, votives, oil paintings, small statuary, like clay statuary with the women with the drums, amulets, and jewelry. So there's all of this artistic record that we really study actually as part of the academy to really understand the origins. And some say it might have begun in Africa, the Middle East. There's a very ancient depiction from about 6,000 years ago, maybe even back into 8,000 years, in Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, and there's a painting on a shrine room wall of a group of people, and one of them is said to have a frame drum. And so the drum really traveled all over the world, and even the migration path of the drum is a little bit lost in the sands of time because a lot of this was even before the written record. There is written record in Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq. And of course, all throughout the Middle East, they have a very rich, deep, beautiful frame drumming practice that was primarily in the dominion of the women. The Hebrew Bible mentions the frame drum, and in that form, it's called the taf or the timbrel, and it would have oftentimes jingles. So the drums also have different ornamentations in them. Sometimes they're painted. So this migration of the drum is something that I study. And again, the footsteps of our ancient ancestors, they do kind of disappear into the sands of time, but we have different ideas about how the drum traveled perhaps on the Silk Route, through the trade routes, maritime travel coming in the boats, through
Okay.
colonization. The drum came, for instance, in the Roman conquest when they went everywhere in their conquest. They brought that deeper into Europe and into England. Even the Scottish women have a frame drumming tradition that's said to go back at least 500 years by written record. And another area of the world that's very interesting for drumming, of course, Africa has really deep rhythmic roots. North Africa, throughout Egypt, the Egyptian temple complexes, the frame drum was one of the primary instruments of the priestesses and the goddesses of the
Mm.
ancient temples. So think Hathor playing her frame drum. They played the drum in the birthing temples of Egypt. And also, the drum was played during the embalming process. So, when they were doing the mummification, the records state that there were drummers sometimes for 40 days and 40 nights while they were helping the person transition into the afterlife. So, if you think about our global map, so to speak, our global lands and oceans, then you see how the drum has really traversed really the full globe. It's said
Mhm.
to be on every continent save for Antarctica. And it even has roots, of course, shamanism, and that word shaman is from the Siberian area and the Mongolian peoples. And they had their frame drumming tradition, which we associate more specifically with shamanism. And the drum also perhaps migrated, but there's also a theory that it's an independently arising phenomenon, or like the 100th monkey, if you've heard that term, where it sprouts up independently. People have the same idea even without contact because
Mm.
drumming is so primal to our being. And there's some reasons why drumming is primal that we could talk about. So that's just to give you sort of an overview. And your listeners, there's one other area that I could speak to in a moment that has an interesting or had an interesting frame drumming practice until it was forbidden and then forgotten.
Ooh, let's hear more of that.
Well, right, yeah. So there is an indigenous group up in what is now Scandinavia. They're called the Sami peoples, and they're traditionally reindeer herders. So if we think about this area of Scandinavia, we can think about Sweden, Norway, Finland, and areas of the Koa Peninsula in Russia. And those tribes and those peoples had their own frame drumming tradition, and their drums, incidentally, were more of an oval shape. And they had a crossbar on the back, and they would often have like a reindeer horn or some kind of a beater, and they would be painted with very intricate maps and symbols and archetypes. And unfortunately for the Sami peoples, their drums were actually confiscated at certain points in history by missionaries, and they were put in huge piles and burned. And they actually became part of the witch trials, and this is all by written record. So the drum, unfortunately, for those people, for a time, was forbidden by penalty of death. And so a lot of people don't know that the Scandinavian people had an original indigenous frame drumming tradition. And it's been interesting kind of reading modern news about what's happening anthropologically with those peoples as one study,
Mhm.
because some of the people, when these other groups of people came to take their traditional practices, which we see happen again and again over and over through colonization and through incursions and people coming into different areas. So some of the people actually would go and hide the drums, and they put them kind of in the crevices between mountains and things. And they were also stolen. Like some of the people just actually stole the other people's drums and took them. And they ended up in the museums all across Europe, these drums of these indigenous peoples that are the
Yeah.
Sami. And just maybe 5 years ago or so, they said, hey, we would like those drums back now. And so the Swedish museum, for one, repatriated some of their drums back to the people. So that area of the world is starting to reclaim
Yeah.
their drumming tradition. And it's all under this umbrella of what is a frame drum. And again, it's the most simple shape, really. And it's almost one of the most simple drums or instruments that we have as people, is just take wood and bend it and put skin over it, and we drum.
Wow. The depths of knowledge that you have on this. I mean, you're like, this is what you do, you research. It's just incredible and amazing. And, it's I kind of got kind of teary-eyed because of how often do things in with our ancestors, are taken from them. And here they are claimed to be, oh, wicked or evil, and so it's destroyed, and it's horrible. It's so sad, and yet here you're bringing all this and sharing this information that something so simple as a frame drum, and how it's all over the world. you know it's like this is something that connect us, and you shared something like drumming is so primal, and that you can share more about that. Can you dive into that?
So many people relate to drumming specifically, and of course, music really is our universal language. We've heard that statement, but it's so based in our history, our collective global human history. Many anthropologists really surmise, hypothesize that we drummed and danced and sang before we spoke. So you imagine back in the day, a way to start to communicate was through rhythm and was through dance and was through song, and then language came out of that. It's also been proposed that music is really an organizing principle, and drumming in particular, because rhythm organizes, and so much of our world and even our cosmos really is about rhythm, the way the world works, the cosmos, even if we think about rhythm in the large cycles, we have our day rhythms, we have the circadian rhythms, we've got our seasonal rhythms. Everything's moving kind of rhythmically. And
Hmm.
then if we go down to the microcosm, we have our heartbeat rhythm that is always with us. And you can imagine back in the day as well that we listened in to our own bodies or to someone near to us, or perhaps a beloved, and we heard their heartbeat. And if we go all the way into the fact that when we are gestating in our mother's womb, when we're babies, that's the first sound that we hear is the sound of the pulse of heart and blood flow. And it's also intricate in how we gestate and how we form. The heart actually starts beating, for instance, and then the arms sprout out. Like, so it's, we're really so based in rhythm. My teacher, Lane Redmond, so I had a primary teacher that taught me much of this, and then I went on to study from her mentorship. So Lane Redmond, she has since passed, but she wrote a book called When the Drummers Were Women. And she was one of the first people that really started to piece together this historical map of how the drum had traveled and shown up in all of these different cultures. And then she also went really deep into why were the people drumming and what were they doing with the drum. So there's that we could talk about. But one of the things that she taught us that really made such an impact was that when a woman is an embryo, and she is inside of the grandmother's womb, all of the eggs that she will ever form happen when she's in the embryo. So, in a sense, each of us as egg form inside of our mother's ovaries when she was an embryo inside of grandmother's womb. Also, in a sense, we're pulsing to rhythm if you think about kind of on that microcosmic level. So, we really are rhythmic beings, and I often think about how that double beat, right? This the double beat heartbeat is just a primal sound.
Mm. Yeah, I'm like sitting with that and I'm like feeling it and I go, it just gives me chills all through my body because it's this remembering, right? Not even realizing it. Just hearing that for me, I feel like this whole like calming type of energy just rush over me and it's like, oh yeah, like and then I notice myself trying to like breathing with it, you know. That's so incredible. And thank you for bringing this and bringing us back to how we're rhythmic beings. We don't realize that. And perhaps even asking ourselves, how in sync are we with the rhythm in our life? Which do we even ask ourselves that these days? You know?
That inquiry. Yeah, and even when you were talking, it was reminding me to breathe more deeply, the breath being rhythmic, and how we can regulate and co regulate and re regulate through rhythm, whether that be drumming, whether that be breath. And even the fact that you mentioned calming, it's one of the things about the frame drum that I always found so interesting was that it had this huge range from really playing drums very soft and melodically and calming, which oftentimes we associate drums with like da da da, drum set or trap drum, the drum line. And it actually goes that range from like lullaby, relaxed, shamanic trance drumming, bringing our brain waves down into, a theta brain, which is more this kind of open meditative state, all the way to like rousing energy. And that is also how the drums have been used historically, everything from the birthing temples and for women in pregnancy. Some even have this hypothesis again, we have to go deeper into it to understand, and some of it we might not ever really know, but the birthing temples of Hathor, they had talked about that perhaps they were using the drums to help the women with their uterine contractions and kind of rhythmically supporting them as they were birthing. And in the temples of Hathor, as you walk in, I've never been to Egypt this lifetime, but there's a processional of like 32 women on each side, and there's a group that have the frame drums, and then there's a group coming down the other side that have the sistrum, which are these rattles with the head of the Hathor sometimes. And then there was also a protector god, a deity that they have in their worldview and tradition. He's called Bes, and he's this little kind of character that is the guardian of women in childbirth and labor. And he also holds the frame drum as his symbol and his emblem and his archetype. So we think about drumming for birth, and then they would also use the drum through different rites of passage, ceremonies, rituals, all the way into the dying rites, where sometimes it would accompany people as they were making their way to the afterlife, or even afterward to help them go to the afterlife. There is an old woodcut, and I wouldn't be able to remember exactly, where it's from right now, but it's actually of Jesus playing the drums, and he was guiding the souls to the afterlife. And in the Renaissance, in the cathedrals, in the medieval cathedrals of Europe, you see the drum then in the hands of the angels, and they're in the form of the tambourine, and they're playing to Mother Mary and baby Jesus. And that's a really common glyph or archetype that you see is angels with tambourines, and they're playing to Mother holding baby Jesus. So there's this full gamut, right, of different usages. Of course, Greece and all throughout the Mediterranean and Turkey have very powerful frame drumming traditions. And so the islands, the archipelago, all throughout the Mediterranean, in the oceans between Greece and Italy and Turkey, it starts to pop up on the different islands. And then they each have a very specific type of drumming depending on the culture and kind of the cultural, like what their qualities are culturally. And so you see, yeah, very different traditions spring up. I'm thinking about southern Italy, the Black Madonnas, and these really powerful earth based rhythms in the southern Italian culture, where there's so many stories I could tell you about that. But one of the points is that it starts to take on these different qualities depending if it's an angel with a tambourine. In the Hebrew Bible, I mentioned Miriam the prophetess. She goes out with her timbrel with the women during the Exodus, and they play for celebration. So, one of the takeaways, really, we could say, is that the framedom doesn't belong to just one culture exclusively. It really is truly cross-cultural and polycultural. And you could go somewhere in the world on the map and kind of pull on a thread. The Mauritius Islands have a huge drumming culture between India and Africa. And so, yeah, it just goes on and on.
Wow. Thank you for taking us all over the world and just really bringing this unity. What I want to hear a little bit more is about women and the drum, because you brought up something, which is incredible. Like, imagine if we were to bring our children in with these drums, and the celebration in that, and how you were saying, it's to help with the breathing, to help with the childbirth. And I'm like, man, that would have helped me with bringing in my three children into this world. But that just sounds incredible. So since this is her story, what did women contribute to the drums? Like, the first thing I think is the women, the gypsies with the tamarines and the dancing and the exoticness of it that kind of played, probably more so in the televisions and movies. But what can you share about that?
Well, yes, you make me think of the Romney people, different indigenous nomadic peoples with their drums. But yes, the drum being used in midwifery and in different rites of fertility, really. But it's actually also kind of coming back into the collective where more and more women are feeling drawn to drum either while they're pregnant, during their pregnancy, or in the birthing process. And I think it's being taken up in more regions of the world. And I think about, I mentioned the Hathor temples, but also the story up in Norway, actually, during those witch trials. Sorry to bring that up again, but there was an old documented case. His name was Paulson, and he was one of the last in the witch trials in Norway. And they brought him in and they said, "We need you to stop playing the drum." And he was like, "I really don't want to stop playing my drum. This is my tradition." I believe he was 100 years old or close at the time. And again, this is all documented. This is all, in records. And he had said that he learned the drum through his mother, which I thought was interesting because it took this history even further back to women again. And he said she had taught him about the drum and that they had used it in labor. And they were also using it for reindeer hunts and to help, ward off certain negative experiences and to help people in different ways that their healing tradition had indicated over many, probably hundreds, if not thousands of years of usage. And I'm hearing modern stories of women even bringing the drum in to the hospital with them. And then they feel in whether, a lot of people say you don't really know what's going to happen individually for the woman. It's a very individual experience, what she calls upon and what is supportive for her. But there are more stories now of women having the drum nearby and seeing if it's something that they feel like attuning with, whether that just be with the beater, which could be a beautiful, just rhythmic sound, or if they do play the frame drum. I know I played the drum while I was in labor and birthing, and it was helpful for me to just recalibrate. And again, the drum can be so soft that some people also find that when their children are small, it can be part of like a bedtime ritual where the mother could or the father could play as the child is going to sleep because it does affect the brain waves most likely. And there is a lot of modern science now that we also learn about in the Frame Drumming Academy. So we're taking in traditional rhythms and traditional wisdom. And then we're also looking at modern research that people do studies with a group of people over a period of time to see if it can be a helpful adjunct or tool to whatever healing modalities are being indicated for things.
Oh my goodness. And it's so true because I've fiddled or I kind of played with the drums a little bit, not a professional like your level, but just that whole thing with the brain waves and how it goes with it. And you brought up how, going to theta, and bringing us down or bringing us down, I guess, to theta and to that meditative and how it just really helped for me. I remember it helped regulate with the breathing and to stay in that um I don't want to say trance, but if that's the appropriate word for it, when I'm in this state, in that state. So, and then the fact of dancing. And so I've done some dancing where like the Afro-Cuban drums, and it really brings me to a certain state. So I'm just like, yeah, like what do we listen to? And we're really listening to the music, and it's that drums in the background and the beat, and then the sounds, of course, but you feel the rhythm first, and it's like, oh yeah, this feels good. And if you can get lost in it, you know.
Absolutely. A couple of things that you said. Of course, the African Cuban, the Brazilian Afro Cuban, so rich. Of course, I mean, we should have probably mentioned that region first and foremost. That's such an epicenter of rhythm spreading all over the globe, and just the type of rhythm is so unique and so deeply embodied. Yeah, really gorgeous area. And my teacher, Elaine Redmond, before she passed, she spent some time living in Brazil because she just fell so deeply in love with the culture and really wanted to get in with candomblé and experience
Yeah.
their traditional drumming. And it really started to kind of come through her music as well. And then the other piece about trance, I find that word, it's so interesting because it can sound a little like heady, like woo, trance. But you think about it, and trance is it's rosary, like, right? Repeating the rosary. It's the mantra. It's anything we do really in repetition can actually bring us into what we might say in a really broad sense is trance. So trance isn't always also people just, wildly throwing their hair around,
Right.
which of course indigenous cultures have beautiful trance and practices that have been maligned and denigrated by other groups of people, tragically in many cases. So we got to keep reworking with this story of our humanity.
Hmm.
That I think about all the different ways of people. Really, what is creating a trance state? It's where we go from a beta wave to an alpha wave to a theta wave. And we could, in a sense, somewhat say, well, we're in a flow state or we're in the zone where we just get really focused and it clears our mind from excess thinking or delimiting thinking, worrying because we're just absorbed. So whenever I hear the word trance, I think about a nun with her rosary, or I think somebody um, looking at poetry or reciting poetry or liturgy, or in the yogis and the yoginis of India when they do the recitation of mantra and recitation of prayer. Even somebody that's just reciting a prayer is kind of going in this rhythmic way, and sometimes maybe even unbeknownst to what that's doing to their physiology. So I think it's so tied in to humans wanting to create states of relaxation and ease and really shifting consciousness. The drum is the original technology for transforming consciousness and anything rhythmic or repetitious.
It's interesting how you brought up, I mean, how we're talking about trance, and then you said transformative. I go, ooh, trance is in transformative, so there's a certain state of your mind that you got to be in to transform, right? So
Absolutely right.
that's just something that was like, oh, that popped in. So we've been talking about all this drumming. Are you going to share with us? Are you open to sharing with us some of the magic behind playing your frame drum?
Sure, absolutely. I have a couple drums. I mean, we've got the drums behind, and just a little story on that is when you start to play frame drums, if you kind of take towards it, you start to understand that they have different sound qualities and different characteristics. And it's also kind of cool because the frame drum is like a price point range where you could start out, which I did with a drum that was like $45, and then they go up in price depending on it. So, there's ways that you can just start in and see if you like it. And a lot of these are also prototypes for drums that I am in collaboration with one of our artisan drum makers here in the US, Cooperman Drums. So this drum is a Cooperman frame drum. I'm just kind of getting a sense whether we want to go with this or we have the suede skin. It's not actually suede, but just kind of feeling into the moment. So when we learn to play the frame drum, We learn through the universal elements. So we have an earth stroke, and that's meant to ground us and create more stability. It brings us into awareness with the earth, with the rocks, the minerals, the gems, the mountains, the bones, our ancestry. This is the earth stroke. It's called a pa. And then we learn the water strokes connected to the waterways, the underground aquifers, the rivers, the tides, the ocean, our tears. That's our doom stroke. And then we move into the fire strokes, connected to the fire, to the hearth, to the candlelight, sunlight, the moonlight. These are our fire strokes. The techs and the tekas. And then we take a few deep breaths as we remember the wind element, our brushing sound on the drum. And then silence for space, the space element.
Hmm.
Nothing like a little improv a cappella drumming where you're not really sure what's going to come out. But that's a little bit of frame drumming in the tradition that I study and teach in.
So, so incredible, so beautiful. I'm just taking that in. That is just incredible and just beautiful with what you just shared with us. Um, so from all this, because drumming is evidently your passion, and your legacy, what did you wish you knew when you were younger? And or what is it that you would, or if you want to answer this as well, um, would you like others to know from your journey, from your sacred journey?
Wow. Well, it's been a difficult, very challenging journey. I think I had a pretty unusual upbringing that was, overcoming a lot of obstacles and hardships, much like I'm sure many people listening. I kind of, in a sense, assume these days that people have gone through a lot. And of course, it's not to also acknowledge that this is such a blessing to be alive on this planet, and there's so much beauty and goodness around us, among us, within us. But I think the earth walk is so challenging, and there's so much division, and people feel isolated. we come up against addictions, distractions, allurements, hardships, people's judgments. We come up against trying to find our way, feeling lost in the forest without a guide. Sometimes we're like slashing through the thicket, the undergrowth. We're trying to find the path again. We get lost along the way. We feel abandoned. We feel exiled. We go through, these feelings of expanding and contraction, trying to find meaning, trying to find where we belong, purpose. And that's my journey in a nutshell. And so, as a young woman, especially, I just, woke up one day, as they say, though it was a long sleep and it was quite trying to come to like, how am I going to navigate this world and how am I going to navigate this life? And do I have a support system? And what's my purpose and how should I proceed? And just even make it just in the world, just, through economics and livelihood and all the things, education. So, yeah, feeling very, very wayward for a time and really, really lost and bereft, just really very lost, I would say. And I didn't know that there was this tradition, which is one of many. I think there's so many beautiful traditions for people and women. And I think it would have been pretty amazing to know that there was this tradition, yeah, specifically for women, though I love men and I love the expression of humans in all their different expressions, but there is something very unique about being a woman and to learn that there was this widespread ancient cross-cultural history that meant so many different things and that it didn't mean just one thing. And I liked that because I felt not only was there freedom in that, but there was also connection in that because it really showed me that something that is so innate and primal to humans, to drum, a frame drum especially, belongs really to everyone. And we kind of joke, we're like, if you have a heartbeat and a drum, like that's all you need. And I do feel like that is true. And so in a sense, I could say I wish I knew that, but I think also the hardships do polish us. It's like the grinding stone, and sometimes we need that grit. And I don't think if it had been so hard, I would have had to dive so deep and to stay the course so strongly because I needed something to pull me through. I needed a tether. I needed something to kind of like keep me going. So I was like, I'll just do this. And because it was so immersed in different cultural history, that's my jam. That's what I love. I love learning about different peoples and I love seeing their traditions. And I love when they're kind of really saturated in their own tradition. And it's like, yeah, there's differences. People do different things. They have different worldviews, but there's also the meeting point and place that we're in rhythm. We each experience the elements. Like when we learn the drum, that's universal. Everybody is connected to earth, water, fire, air, and space. No matter who you are, no
Mhm.
matter what your religion or belief system, we all depend on the elements and we're made up of them. So it's what I've learned along the way. And I also want to share that and remind others of that you're connected, that you're rhythmic, that you can find different modalities. It could be the drum, it could be gardening, it could be parenting, it could be being in a relationship. There's different ways to connect to God, source, life force,
Mhm.
goddess.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for just sharing your beauty, your legacy, your passion, and your grace. Krista, you just hold so much grace. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel the same about you. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation, and I really appreciate the invitation and what you're doing with your Sacred Herstory podcast. It's so cool. I was like, oh yeah, those words and just meeting you. I feel very honored that you would have me and invite me for this conversation. So thank you so much.
Well, I'm honored that you're here because these drums and the story behind it, it just brings this unity. Like this is our ancestors. This is like root. This is what we can relate to. The drum beat, the heartbeat, you know. So also, where can people find you? How can they learn from you and connect with you? Can you share that information?
Sure. So we're framedrummingacademy.com, and be sure to get that plural in there, framedrummingacademy.com. And I teach people to play the drum. I teach women and about the history and the herstory. You see the images, you see all the pictures of the women with the drum from the ancient world. I also have a facilitators course where you learn to bring the drums into your community in different ways. It's a very in-depth course that also could be another stream of income, additional livelihood for people. And so that's sort of the main way that you can get in touch with me right now. Eventually, the KristaHolland.com website will be back up. It's kind of in under the wraps right now, being remodeled.
Your
But
construction.
and then of course, there's YouTube Krista Holland and Instagram Krista Holland underscore if you want to connect over there.
Okay. And all of Krista's information will be in the description for you to connect with her. I'm interested in the facilitators program myself. I just want to learn more, and you just shared so much beauty. So, and just to connect with our roots, it's just something so incredible about it. And then, of course, it's women too. Women did this. So, thank you, Krista, again. And thank you, all of you who joined us in this story where I hope it moved and inspired you and remind you that you're not alone on this journey. And there's so much unity here. And I invite you to follow and subscribe to the Sacred Her Story podcast. This is where real women share their raw and filtered becoming, the sacred, the messy, and the powerful. And in this case, even our sacred roots. So join us again. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, keep walking your sacred path, and keep writing your sacred her story.